In a history-defining moment, William and Catherine stepped forward at Windsor not as heirs, but as acting king and queen. With no formal announcement, their presence alone shifted the monarchy. The world watched in awe as the future of the crown arrived, quietly, confidently, and unmistakably ready. The moment that stopped. Britain, William and Catherine. Step forward as king and queen. It happened not in a gilded throne room, but on a cool, gray morning outside Windsor Castle. As the gates opened and a quiet procession began, the faces emerging from within were not those the nation expected. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped out hand in hand, but not as heirs, not as shadows of the crown. Today, they walked as the acting king and queen. There were no formal titles spoken, no heralds announcing a change. But in the silence, the message was clear. This was not symbolism. This was stewardship. The decision had come swiftly and privately. With King Charles's health declining behind palace walls, advisors and senior royals had agreed. The monarchy could not stand still. The crown, without fanfare or flourish, needed to be carried forward. As they approached the gathered crowd outside Windsor, hundreds stood shoulder to shoulder, many holding signs. For the future, William and Catherine. Others clutched photographs of Queen Elizabeth II, as if hoping to pass on her strength through memory. One woman near the front wept openly, saying, "She looks like she's already wearing the crown." Catherine's presence, poised yet heavy with quiet emotion, was unmistakable. Her tailored coat, in soft dove gray, stood out against the damp cobblestones, a color neither celebratory nor mournful, but dignified. She waved gently, but her expression remained solemn. Behind her, William moved with a calm certainty. No speeches were made, but the power of the moment didn't need them. Inside Westminster Abbey just days prior, the Archbishop's subtle blessing of William and Catherine had seemed traditional. In retrospect, it was a quiet handover. His words, "Responsibility is now carried by those ready to bear it," now echoed through the country like prophecy. Palace aides, when questioned by the press, avoided the word regency. Instead, they used a carefully measured phrase, co-stewardship in the service of the crown. But the authority was real, and the people felt it. One royal advisor was overheard saying, "This isn't about ceremony, it's about stability. Britain needed to see the future, and now it has." The monarchy had not changed hands, not formally, but everything had changed. The silent transfer of power at Westminster Abbey. No gold carriages, no roaring crowds, no thunderous proclamations. And yet, the moment power shifted in the British monarchy happened beneath the Gothic arches of Westminster Abbey, in silence. It was Princess Anne who carried the ceremonial crown. The Queen Consort's circlet, crafted from stones passed down through Queen Elizabeth II's private collection, glistened only faintly under the Abbey lights. It was a crown not made for pageantry, but for legacy. And it was not placed on Camilla's head, but offered reverently to Catherine. There were no trumpets, only breath held. Catherine accepted the crown, but wore it for just a moment, enough for every lens to capture, enough for the nation to understand what had quietly occurred. Her face said everything. She did not smile, she did not blink. Her expression was not triumphant, but solemn, a reflection of the weight now resting on her shoulders. One palace staffer later remarked, "She wore it like it hurt, because she knows what it costs." The Archbishop's words at the private blessing were brief, but unforgettable. The burden is now borne by those prepared not for power, but for service. It wasn't a coronation. There were no oaths, no anointing, but those who watched, inside the abbey, inside the palace, and across the world, knew that the center of gravity had shifted.
Catherine, now wearing Queen Elizabeth's diamonds and Princess Anne's trust, stood at the center of an ancient institution, not as a consort, but as a quiet sovereign in waiting.
One historian later wrote, "It was not the sound of a crown being passed. It was the sound of silence, and the world listening." Outside, as word spread, public mood transformed from shock to resolve. The future was no longer uncertain. It was walking among them. The first walkabout, a queen in action. The following morning, Catherine emerged from Windsor Castle, arm linked with William's. But this time, the walk wasn't symbolic. It was active leadership. Hundreds had gathered near the castle gates. Veterans in full dress, school children holding hand-painted flags, locals with flowers, letters, prayers. The atmosphere was electric with emotion, yet hushed with reverence. Catherine, dressed in a structured gray coat with understated pearls, moved deliberately, not rushing, not retreating. Every step was measured, every hand she touched, every child she knelt to greet, carried purpose. She approached a war veteran in his late 80s, seated in a wheelchair. He clasped her gloved hand and whispered, "God bless the new queen." Without hesitation, she replied softly, "God bless the king." It was a quiet echo of devotion, not to herself, but to her husband, to the crown, to the institution. Observers noted her calm as she comforted a grieving widow who had recently lost her son to cancer. "You carry grief with strength," the woman said through tears. Catherine held her hand and answered, "So do you." There was no distance between her and the public, no script, just presence, just authenticity. Meanwhile, the press asked, where was Camilla? Her absence loomed larger by the hour. No statements were made, no explanations offered. And yet, the silence sharpened the contrast. The Queen Consort, once a central figure beside Charles, had not appeared since the Abbey. "Catherine didn't replace her," said one observer. "She simply arrived, and everyone felt it." That day, it wasn't about optics. It was about embodiment. The people saw not the idea of a queen, but the reality of one. Behind the castle walls, what changed inside the palace? Beyond the public moments, the crown, the blessing, the walkabout, seismic changes were unfolding behind the scenes. Within 48 hours of William and Catherine's first appearance as acting monarchs, internal structures within the royal household began to realign. Clarence House staff, long loyal to King Charles and Queen Camilla, were quietly reassigned, many redirected to Kensington Palace. The epicenter of communication shifted almost overnight. Press briefings, speech drafts, and diplomatic scheduling began flowing through William and Catherine's team. No one used the word overhaul, one insider shared. But we all knew this was the shift. This was it. Inside the private drawing room, King Charles reportedly signed an internal directive handing over day-to-day decision-making for ceremonial and domestic duties to his son. The line was simple: let William take it from here. And what of Camilla? According to multiple sources, the Queen Consort left for Raymill House, her private residence in Wiltshire. There were no goodbyes, no fanfare. She left as quietly as she had entered public life years ago. Her staff was reduced, Her role, unspoken, had changed. One footman was overheard saying, "It felt final," like she knew the story was closing. Princess Anne, always the anchor in times of crisis, was said to have visited Charles later that evening and uttered just one line, "You can rest now. They're ready." And so, the reign continued, but from different hands. Anne and Catherine, the crown's new axis.
Amid the shifting structure of the monarchy, one unexpected force steadied the transition: the alliance between Princess Anne and Catherine.
They were different in age, in background, in style. But both women understood something essential: that monarchy was not about appearance, but endurance. Not about glamour, but grit. During the ceremonial exchange at Westminster, Catherine had bowed deeply to Anne, a gesture that was neither rehearsed nor expected. But it was deliberate. The moment, captured in a single photograph, went viral within hours. Newspapers called it "the bow that bound the crown." From that point, they became an axis of purpose. Anne took Catherine under her wing, not with lectures, but with quiet guidance. She accompanied her to state briefings, helped her navigate military relations, and even sat beside her during meetings once reserved solely for Charles and Camilla. "The crown doesn't wait for comfort," Anne reportedly told Catherine. "It waits for courage." Together, they co-chaired the Commonwealth Youth Forum just days after stepping into their new roles. It was an event that once would have been led by Charles and Camilla. Now, Anne and Catherine stood at the helm, introducing youth delegates, delivering closing remarks, and answering questions with humility and vision. The image of these two women, one the daughter of a queen, the other the daughter-in-law of destiny, now embodied a new kind of monarchy, not built on power, but on partnership. The Camilla Divide, a crown grown quiet. As the monarchy shifted quietly but unmistakably toward William and Catherine, one figure began to fade, not out of scandal, but out of space: Queen Camilla. She had been at Charles's side through his rise, through Diana's shadow, through the decades of waiting. But now, she had stepped back. Entirely. Her absence at Westminster Abbey, at Windsor, and at the Commonwealth Youth Forum did not go unnoticed, nor did the silence that followed. For days, no statements were issued, no photos released, only whispers, and one clear truth: Camilla was no longer at the center. Behind palace walls, her private secretary tendered a quiet resignation. Long-serving aides, many of whom had worked with her since the early 2000s, began reassignments or early retirement. Raymill House, her long-protected sanctuary, became her full-time residence once again. One royal source put it simply: she felt displaced, not in title, but in relevance. It wasn't a feud. There were no fights, no bitterness reported. But the emotional weight of the moment was unmistakable. The institution had turned toward the future, and Camilla, once reluctantly accepted by the public, now found herself outside the frame. In a rare private gesture, Prince William drove to Raymill alone. He asked for no staff to accompany him. The conversation, kept strictly confidential, is said to have been quiet, respectful, and deeply human. Camilla's reply, captured by one source close to the household, said everything. Renewal comes for everyone. It never asks permission. It was not bitterness. It was understanding. And that conversation, more than any formal statement, marked the moment the monarchy moved forward without her at its center. The Queen Consort's reign was not revoked, but it had retreated, and the world had accepted the shift with grace. The world reacts. Catherine becomes the crown's new voice. As Britain adjusted to William and Catherine's new role, the world watched and, unexpectedly, applauded. Within days, Commonwealth nations began issuing statements of support. Prime ministers and governors general praised Catherine's measured strength and timeless calm. Diplomats described her as a symbol of continuity in an era desperate for steadiness. She did not seek the spotlight, but it found her. A quietly released photo, William and Catherine walking hand in hand through the grounds of Sandringham, went viral. No tiaras, no crowds. Just two people carrying something larger than themselves. At a children's hospice in Sussex, Catherine was seen kneeling beside a terminally ill boy. She didn't speak to the press, but the boy's mother later said, "She sat on the floor and asked about his favorite story. And when I cried, she held my hand." There were no headlines that day, no palace-issued statements, but the images, captured by a nurse's phone and shared with permission, spread across the globe. International media dubbed her the monarchy's moral compass. For the first time since Queen Elizabeth's final years, public trust in the institution began to rise. Polls showed a staggering 84% approval rating for Catherine, the highest since 2022. Even Republican voices softened, calling her a royal who remembers the people. Camilla's presence in the headlines all but disappeared. The narrative was no longer about who had stepped back. It was about who had stepped forward. The forum that confirmed it all. If the world had wondered whether William and Catherine's role was temporary, the Commonwealth Youth Forum erased all doubt. There was no crown, no ceremony, just duty, presence, and undeniable command. Catherine and Princess Anne co-hosted the three-day gathering, welcoming youth leaders from across 56 nations. From climate innovation panels to education summits, the tone was clear. This wasn't about the monarchy being admired. It was about the monarchy being useful. Catherine opened each session, not with speeches, but by introducing others. She asked questions, listened more than she spoke, chose humility over grandeur. Her closing remarks, however, struck a global chord. The crown does not exist to rule. It exists to remind us that compassion is power, that we rise when we lift others. It was simple, but it echoed. The same day, Camilla made her first public appearance in weeks, a charity luncheon in Wiltshire. While respectable, it passed largely unnoticed. Within palace circles, the contrast between the two engagements was undeniable. One marked the heartbeat of the modern monarchy. The other, a whisper of what had been. And for the public, it confirmed what had already been felt. A silent crowning had occurred. No oaths, no ceremonies, just service. A new kind of queen, duty, not display. From the moment she entered royal life, Catherine never chased the spotlight, but somehow it always found her. And now, as the acting queen consort, it wasn't adoration or attention that defined her leadership. It was deliberate restraint. She didn't step into the role with fanfare or flourish. She stepped in quietly, with sleeves rolled, crown lightened, and focus sharpened. And it began, meaningfully, with one word: no. At the Commonwealth Youth Forum, she had been offered a symbolic honor to narrate the opening film, a role typically reserved for the highest-ranking royal in attendance. Her team was ready, the script prepared. But Catherine declined. "Let them speak for themselves," she reportedly told her advisors. And so they did. The final film featured the voices of young leaders from across the Commonwealth, students, artists, activists, narrating in their native dialects and accents. It was powerful, raw, and deeply human. This wasn't modesty for applause. It was conviction. "She understands something vital," said one palace insider. "The crown can't just speak about the people anymore. It has to listen to them." And her choices continued to reflect that. When offered the opportunity to design a new ceremonial crown for her role, a chance to create something iconic, she declined again. Instead, Catherine requested that the existing circlet be ethically adapted. Reused heirloom metals, stones from Queen Elizabeth's personal collection. The entire piece was assembled by artisans trained in sustainable sourcing. "The message was clear," a palace source explained. "Every thread, every jewel, every gesture. She wants it to mean something." While international media begged for interviews, profiles, magazine covers, and documentaries, Catherine remained out of reach. There were no glossy spreads, no fashion headlines. "I'm not here to be looked at," she reportedly told an aide during a briefing. "I'm here to look after." That sentence, later repeated in court circles, became something of an unofficial motto. It began appearing in quiet ways, on internal memos, handwritten on notes of gratitude she sent to staff, and even mentioned by youth delegates at events. Inside the Privy Council, language began to evolve as well. While no formal proclamation had been made, officials began referring to her with increasing regularity as Queen Consort Designate. It was unspoken protocol catching up to reality. Even the most reserved constitutional advisors began to acknowledge it. Catherine was already functioning as a sovereign figure. Her schedule mirrored that of a reigning queen. Her audiences with global leaders had intensified. Her influence over public projects and ceremonial protocol had deepened. And yet, she never sought credit. One senior courtier with over 3 decades of experience at court put it most clearly. "She's not replacing anyone. She's not filling shoes. She's restoring something that was nearly lost, a quiet strength, an anchored dignity. The kind the crown hasn't seen since Elizabeth. No throne had been ascended. No crown had been formally placed. But in every action, Catherine had redefined what it meant to be queen, not by holding power, but by holding steady." The Winter Shift. When the crown let go. It wasn't marked by trumpets, proclamations, or waving balcony appearances. It was Christmas, soft, cold, and unspoken, that carried the final signal. A tradition rooted in monarchy became the moment the crown quietly let go. Sandringham had always been the sacred royal setting for Christmas Day. The walk to St. Mary Magdalene Church was familiar, predictable, iconic. But this year, something was different. Not in spectacle, but in meaning. At precisely 10:58 a.m., Prince William and Princess Catherine stepped out of the estate hand in hand. But it was not just their presence that shifted the atmosphere, it was their position. For the first time, they walked at the front of the family procession. There was no Charles, no Camilla. The public, many of whom had arrived in the early morning hours, stood 3 deep along the narrow country road. The temperature hovered near freezing, but no one left. They were waiting, not just for royals, but for reassurance. And then they came. Catherine wore a long, deep forest green coat, the same hue Queen Elizabeth had often favored during her Sandringham years. Her gloves were leather, her hat was velvet, her smile was soft but reserved, a careful balance between joy and gravity. William, tall and focused, walked beside her with an expression not of pride, but responsibility. Behind them trailed their children, George growing taller, eyes serious, Charlotte composed and graceful in her stride, and Louis holding tightly to Catherine's coat, wide-eyed at the crowds and cameras. The people didn't cheer immediately. First they watched. Then, slowly, the crowd began to clap. One older man removed his cap. Another woman wept silently as Catherine passed. Someone called out, "God save the king!" followed by another voice, "And the queen!" There was no correction, no awkwardness. It felt right. That evening, while the family gathered behind the private walls of Sandringham House, the king's pre-recorded Christmas broadcast aired across the nation. It was short, just under 6 minutes. Charles sat in a softly lit room, his breathing audible, his pace slower than usual. But every word was deliberate. And then came the line that echoed across every living room in Britain. To William and Catherine, who have become the living heart of service, I am proud beyond measure. It was not abdication. It was not resignation. It was something quieter, more meaningful. A father, a king, giving his blessing not to a throne, but to a calling. The next morning, before the press caught wind, the Privy Council issued a private internal notice. Catherine, Princess of Wales, is to be recognized as acting head for ceremonial state duties until further notice. The phrasing was cautious, but the meaning was absolute. Snow began to fall that evening in Westminster. Light flurries at first, then heavier, blanketing the rooftops of Parliament, the Abbey, and the Tower. The bells rang at midnight to welcome the new year. There was no headline that read, "A new queen has risen." But Britain didn't need the headline. They had seen her walk, heard her words, felt her presence. And in that quiet, snowy stillness, beneath bells and stars and tradition, the truth settled softly across the land. Catherine's reign had already begun. Not crowned, not declared, but lived. Without fanfare, without ceremony, Catherine and William changed the course of royal history. Through grace, strength, and service, they became the face of a new era. The monarchy didn't declare it. The people felt it. In their first appearance as king and queen, the future didn't wait. It arrived.